What happens when a self-made CEO goes undercover and faces discrimination in his own store? On a quiet Saturday morning, just past 10 a.m., Nathan Carter sat in his car, staring into the rearview mirror. The man looking back at him was a far cry from the confident leader who had built a small startup into a billion-dollar retail empire. Gone were the power suits and the air of authority. Instead, a worn-out hoodie and faded jeans told a different story, one of an ordinary customer, just another face in the weekend crowd. Today wasn't about boardroom meetings or financial projections. It was about stepping into the heart of his own company, not as the CEO, but as a nameless shopper navigating the aisles. Nathan had always believed in running a business built on fairness, inclusivity, and respect. His brand stood for more than just products. It promised that every customer mattered, no matter their background. But lately, unsettling whispers had reached his ears, rumors of dismissive staff, quiet biases, and a store culture that didn't reflect his vision. If those whispers were true, he needed to see it with his own eyes. Not as the man who signed the paychecks, but as the customer who walked in unnoticed. The retail store in question sat just outside Austin, Texas, nestled in a bustling suburban shopping plaza. It wasn't the flagship location, nor was it the top performer in the company's chain, but to Nathan Carter, this store held a deeper significance. Years ago, this had been his first expansion outside his home state, a bold move that had paid off beyond expectations. In its early days, he had visited often, overseeing every detail. But now, years later, he found himself wondering, had the warmth and inclusivity he had built his empire on survived the test of time? Nathan pulled into the parking lot, his fingers tapping lightly against the steering wheel. A strange mix of anticipation and unease settled in his chest. He was about to step into the unknown, stripping away the armor of his title, exposing himself to whatever reality awaited. This wasn't about corporate reports or second-hand accounts. He owed himself and every customer who walked through those doors the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. But what Nathan didn't know was that the truth would shake him to his core. What started as a simple undercover visit would lead to a moment that would change everything he thought he knew about his own business. He exhaled sharply, then grabbed his weathered canvas messenger bag, the kind that screamed practicality, not power. Today, he wasn't CEO Nathan Carter. He was just another customer. The storefront gleamed under the late morning sun, its bold logo standing proudly against the Texas sky. A flicker of pride stirred in him as he approached the automatic doors. This was his vision brought to life, but pride quickly gave way to focus. He wasn't here to admire his work, he was here to see if it still lived up to the values he had built it on. Inside, the store was alive with energy. Shopping carts clattered against linoleum, children's laughter echoed from the toy aisle, and employees moved in rhythm, stocking shelves, scanning barcodes, answering questions. To the casual observer, everything ran smoothly. But Nathan wasn't a casual observer. He was here to see beneath the surface. Nathan paused near a display of vibrant kitchen appliances, casually surveying his surroundings. A young woman in a neatly pressed store uniform chatted enthusiastically with a customer, explaining product features with a warm smile. A stock associate methodically rearranged items on a nearby shelf, his movements efficient, but detached, going through the motions without much engagement. And then there was the electronics counter. A younger employee, probably in his early 20s, leaned lazily against the counter, eyes glued to his phone. His posture screamed disinterest, completely unaware of or indifferent to the shoppers around him. Nathan decided to test the waters. He meandered toward the electronics section, mimicking the unhurried pace of a casual shopper. Nothing about his demeanor should have set off any alarms, just another guy browsing. He picked up a pair of headphones, turning them over thoughtfully in his hands, pausing just long enough to invite interaction. A simple test. Would the employee acknowledge him? Offer assistance, even just a polite nod? But nothing came. The young man remained fixated on his screen, fingers mindlessly scrolling, never once glancing up. Nathan waited, giving the employee every possible chance to engage, but the silence between them stretched, heavy and telling. A slow knot of unease formed in his stomach. Maybe the kid was busy. Maybe he hadn't noticed. Maybe this wasn't what it looked like. Still, Nathan moved on, weaving through the aisles while keeping a careful eye on employee-customer interactions. What he saw next made the contrast impossible to ignore. An older woman near the home goods section looked lost, scanning the area for help. Before Nathan could step in, another store associate appeared, a young woman with an easy smile and an upbeat demeanor. She approached immediately, ready to assist. Relief softened the older woman's face, her frustration melting as they engaged in conversation. The difference was stark. Nathan turned back toward electronics, determined to give the young man another chance. Maybe the moment had simply been bad timing, maybe. But what happened next made it crystal clear that this wasn't just an isolated oversight. This was something bigger. Returning to the electronics counter, Nathan picked up a boxed set of Bluetooth speakers and placed it deliberately on the counter, not forceful, but just noticeable enough to be undeniable. Finally, the employee looked up. Expression blank, uninterested. "Can I help you?" The words were hollow, devoid of any real interest or effort. Nathan knew that tone well. It was the sound of someone who couldn't care less about their job, much less the customer standing in front of them. Still, he smiled, trying to keep the interaction from veering into full-blown hostility. "Yeah, I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about these. Are they good for outdoor use?" The employee barely glanced at the box before shrugging. "I don't know, probably." His gaze was already drifting back toward his phone. Nathan blinked, momentarily caught off guard. It wasn't just laziness, it was pure indifference. "Could you maybe check? I just want to make sure before I buy them." A dramatic sigh. As if Nathan had just asked for something absurdly unreasonable. Without a word, the employee flipped the box over and skimmed the back label. "Says here they're weatherproof." He shoved the box back toward Nathan without further explanation. A slow frustration started to build in Nathan's chest, but he kept his voice steady. "Okay, and do you know if they're compatible with most devices?" That's when it happened, the eye roll. A lazy, exaggerated flick of the eyes, like Nathan was wasting his time. "Look, man, all the details are right here on the box." He motioned vaguely toward the shelf. "You can read it yourself, or pick something else. Doesn't matter to me." The words hit harder than they should have. Not because of what was said, but because of what they implied. Nathan let the silence settle, measuring the weight of the moment. This wasn't just inattentiveness, this was deliberate. He cast a quick glance around the store. Other customers were being treated with warmth, with care. At the front, a white couple received personalized recommendations from the same employee who had helped the older woman earlier. Friendly, engaged, attentive, yet here he was, barely acknowledged. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain composed. He wasn't here to argue. He was here to observe. "You seem busy," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "Is there someone else who might be able to help?" The employee smirked, a slow, deliberate smirk. Disdain curled at the corners of his mouth. And in that moment, Nathan knew this wasn't just a bad attitude. This was something else entirely. "I don't think anyone's free right now." "Just figure it out, all right." The words hit harder than Nathan expected. Not because they were harsh, but because of what they represented. This wasn't just a bad attitude. It was something deeper, something uglier. And it wasn't just about him. If this was how an employee treated someone they assumed was an ordinary shopper, how many others had walked out of this store feeling that same sting of indifference? Nathan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say a word, the young man had already turned away, grabbing his phone and casually disappearing toward the back of the store. Nathan stood there, rooted in place, still holding the box of speakers. A flicker of frustration stirred in his chest. He considered leaving, just walking out, but no. He wasn't done yet. What he didn't realize was that this moment, this blatant act of dismissiveness, was about to expose something far more troubling about the company he thought he had built. Nathan placed the speakers back on the shelf, his mind racing. This wasn't just unprofessional, it felt personal. He needed to be sure, was this just one bad employee, a fluke? Or was there a bigger problem buried beneath the surface? He moved toward the clothing section, where a young Latina employee stood neatly folding shirts at a display. Her energy was different. She greeted him with a warm, genuine smile. "Let me know if you need help with anything." Nathan nodded, offering a polite thanks. It was a stark contrast to what had just happened in electronics. This was what he had envisioned for his store's welcoming, attentive, professional. He lingered, pretending to browse, quietly observing as she helped an elderly man pick out the right size and even suggested a matching tie. She was patient, engaged, kind. The man's gratitude was obvious, and for the first time that morning, Nathan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the store wasn't entirely off track. But then, as he moved toward the home goods section, something stopped him in his tracks. Two employees stood casually leaned against a shelf, their voices hushed but unmistakably dismissive. Nathan shifted slightly, pretending to examine a set of pots and pans. "That guy over there," one of them muttered, jerking his head subtly in Nathan's direction. "He's probably just here to browse." People like him never buy anything big. Nathan felt his jaw tighten. The other employee chuckled. "Yeah, he doesn't look like he's got the cash for this stuff. Probably just wasting time." The air around him suddenly felt heavier. This wasn't just bad service. This was bias, assumption, prejudice, and the worst part, it was happening in the company he had built. It was a gut punch. They didn't know who he was. To them, he was just another black man wandering through a store they assumed he couldn't afford. But that wasn't what stung the most. It was the casual nature of their conversation, the ease with which they dismissed him. This wasn't just about one bad employee. This was about a culture that had somehow allowed these attitudes to take root and fester. Nathan swallowed down the initial surge of anger, forcing himself to stay quiet. Confronting them here, right now, wouldn't fix the problem. He needed to see the full picture. So instead, he made his way toward the checkout area, determined to gather as much insight as possible before deciding what to do next. At the register, he found a middle-aged black woman scanning items with practiced efficiency. Her name tag read Denise. Nathan observed her as she worked. Her warmth was undeniable. Every customer got the same treatment, a kind smile, steady professionalism, a genuine effort to help. When his turn came, she looked up and greeted him with the same ease. "Did you find everything okay?" Nathan hesitated for a beat. "Not exactly," he admitted, his tone measured. "But I think I'll hold off for now." For a brief moment, her smile wavered, but she nodded. "Well, if you need anything, just let us know. We're here to help." And the thing was, she meant it. That sincerity, that genuine customer service, eased some of the weight on Nathan's chest. Not everyone in this store operated with the same indifference. But that only made the situation more troubling. Why were some employees welcoming while others were so blatantly dismissive? Why was the culture so inconsistent? Nathan walked out of the store, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play. He slid into the driver's seat of his car, the Texas heat pressing against the windows like a silent force. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. He stared at the store, his store, the one that bore his company's logo, his vision, his values. Or at least, the values he thought it stood for. The experiences he had just lived through painted a much different picture. One he wasn't prepared for, one he couldn't ignore. The electronics employee's dismissiveness still lingered in his mind. But it was those casual, cutting remarks in the home goods section that left the deepest wound. This wasn't just a bad day. This wasn't just a few bad apples. This was systemic. And it had gone unchecked for far too long. Nathan exhaled slowly, his decision already made. It was time to confront the truth, head on. Nathan leaned back in his seat, staring at the store through the windshield. His store. His mind drifted back to the early days when this business was still small enough for him to personally train every manager, when he handpicked employees based on shared values rather than just resumes. Back then, he had drilled one principle into every hire. We treat every customer like family no matter who they are or how much they spend. But now, had success diluted that message? Had expansion come at the cost of the very values he built this company on? Delegation had been necessary. He couldn't run everything himself. But in handing over responsibility, had he also handed over control of the culture? Nathan exhaled, gripping the notebook he had pulled from his glove compartment. He jotted down everything that had just unfolded: the indifferent service, the casual bias, the stark inconsistency between employees. This wasn't just about one store. This was bigger. Were managers fostering an environment of respect? Or were they quietly allowing discrimination and unprofessionalism to take root? Had he failed to equip his employees with the tools to recognize bias and combat it? His thoughts drifted back to Denise, the kind cashier. She was a reminder of what his business should stand for. Yet, employees like her were being overshadowed by those who didn't share her values. This wasn't just about the customer experience anymore. This was about the culture. And he had let it happen. Nathan snapped his notebook shut. Before he could rebuild, he had one more step to take. A step that would reveal just how deep this problem ran. A step that would challenge those at the heart of it. With quiet determination, Nathan pushed open the doors and stepped back into the store. He wasn't here to cause a scene or publicly shame anyone. This wasn't about ego. This was about accountability. He walked straight to the customer service desk and asked to speak with the store manager. A few moments later, a man in his late 40s approached, his expression calm but slightly guarded. His name tag read, Brian. Nathan extended a hand, and with it, the conversation that would define the future of his company began. "How can I help you today?" Nathan extended a hand. "Nathan Carter," he said evenly, watching as Brian's eyes widened in recognition. "I'm the owner of this store." For a brief moment, Brian's composure cracked just enough for Nathan to see the flicker of panic behind his eyes. But the manager recovered quickly. "Mr. Carter, it's an honor to meet you." "If I'd known you were visiting," Nathan raised a hand, cutting him off. "That's the point, Brian. You weren't supposed to know. I came here as a regular customer to see how things are really running. And what I saw today," he let the words hang in the air for a beat. "It wasn't good." A flush crept up Brian's neck. "I'm sorry to hear that. Can you tell me what happened?" Nathan recounted the day in calm, measured tones: the electronics employees' blatant indifference, the offhanded, cutting remarks in home goods, the stark contrast in how different customers were treated. His voice never wavered. He wasn't here to yell. He didn't need to. The weight of his disappointment spoke louder than anger ever could. "This isn't just about one bad employee," he said, his gaze steady. "It's about a culture that allows this kind of behavior to exist. I built this company on the belief that every customer deserves respect no matter who they are. Today, I saw the opposite of that." Brian shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't aware of these issues. "I've always tried to ensure our team follows the company's values." Nathan nodded. "I believe you. But clearly, something is slipping through the cracks. And that's not just your responsibility, it's mine too. Somewhere along the way, I've let the values I built this company on get diluted." That ends today. Minutes later, the break room was filled with employees. Some looked curious, others looked nervous. They weren't sure what to expect. Nathan stood before them, not just another customer, the leader they didn't expect to see. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nathan Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of this company." A ripple of silence spread through the room. The weight of his words sank in. Nathan let the moment breathe, meeting each gaze in the room. Then he continued. Nathan let the silence settle over the room, each second stretching under the weight of his words. "What I saw today was troubling." His gaze swept across the gathered employees. Some stood stiffly, their faces unreadable. Others shifted uncomfortably. "Some of you showed kindness and professionalism, the kind of attitude this company was built on. But others," he let the words linger, "others failed to meet even the most basic standard of respect." And that failure, Nathan exhaled, steady but firm. It isn't just on you, it's on me. I should have ensured our culture stayed consistent. I should have made sure that no matter what store a customer walked into, they'd be treated with the same level of respect. His eyes locked onto the young electronics employee, who suddenly looked pale, nervous, cornered. You dismissed me, ignored me. Made it clear I wasn't worth your time. That's unacceptable. Then Nathan turned toward the two employees from the home goods section. But even worse, his voice remained calm, but there was no mistaking the weight behind it. I overheard two of you speaking about me, making assumptions about who I am and what I could afford based on nothing more than a glance. A few employees cast furtive glances toward each other. The room was thick with tension, but Nathan kept his tone measured, controlled. I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here to fix this, because if we don't treat every customer with respect, we fail, and I won't let this company fail. As he stood there, watching expressions shift from shock to reflection, Nathan knew one thing. This was just the beginning. Pointing out the problem wasn't enough. Now came the part that mattered most: action. Nathan let the room breathe in silence for a moment before he continued. Here's what's going to happen. His voice was calm, but unshakable. This isn't about punishment. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about accountability and growth. Every single one of us, including me, has a responsibility to uphold the values this company was built on. Starting today, we're making changes. Nathan turned to Brian, the store manager. First, we're implementing mandatory training on bias and customer service, not just here, but in every store. It's not enough to assume people know how to treat others. We need to teach it, reinforce it, and hold people accountable. Brian gave a quick, resolute nod, his expression a mix of relief and determination. Understood, Mr. Carter. I'll make sure it happens. But Nathan wasn't done yet, because fixing the culture wasn't just about policies. It was about something bigger. And the next step would change everything. Nathan addressed the group once more, his voice steady, his resolve unwavering. Second, I'll be visiting more stores in person unannounced. A ripple of unease moved through the room. Employees exchanged quick glances, some shifting on their feet. Nathan let the moment settle before continuing. This isn't about catching anyone off guard. It's about staying connected. I need to see firsthand what's happening on the ground, not just through reports, not just through numbers, but through real experiences. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Denise nodding subtly. A few others followed, the tension in the room giving way to something else: understanding. Lastly, Nathan said, his tone softening, I want to hear from all of you. What's working? What's not? If there are issues, whether with leadership, policies, or anything else, I need to know. My door is open. But more importantly, I'm making sure there's a way for you to voice concerns anonymously. If you don't feel comfortable coming to me directly, that shouldn't stop you from being heard. For the first time since the meeting started, the tension in the room noticeably eased. Nathan saw it in their faces, the slight shift in posture, the subtle exhale of relief. They weren't just being talked at. They were being listened to, and that mattered. Nathan took a deep breath. This was it, the moment to close on something real. I started this company because I wanted to create something different, something better, a place where everyone, no matter who they are, feels valued. Somewhere along the way, we lost a little bit of that. But I'm not giving up on it. I know we can do better. And I'm counting on all of you to help make that happen. As the meeting wrapped up, Nathan made his way to Denise, the cashier who had been a bright spot in a difficult day. He offered her a genuine smile. Thank you for being a bright spot today. Denise met his gaze, her voice steady. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I just try to treat people the way I'd want to be treated. Simple words. But they carried the very essence of what he had built this company on. Nathan stepped out of the store for the second time that day. A mixture of exhaustion and hope settled in his chest. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. He had been given a wake-up call. Now it was up to him to act on it. And as he drove away, A thought settled in his mind, one that solidified his purpose. Sometimes, facing hard truths is the only way to move forward, and every step toward change starts with someone willing to take the first. If this story resonated with you, remember this: the smallest actions can create the biggest impact. Treat people with respect. Speak up when you see injustice. Never stop striving for a better, fairer world. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire change.